Here we have lesson 23 entitled President Jefferson and the Martial Court. So our TEEKs, as we usually do, we're going to put events in order. We need to know why 1803 is an important date. We're continuing our discussion of early Republic leaders and how they handled major problems. But what we want to look at here that's new material is the idea of judicial review, and we're going to look at several court cases that affected that, and we want to look at the role of John Marshall in the early Republic. So let's begin. So the election of 1800. It's time for John Adams to run for re-election, but his party, the Federalists, are very unpopular, and we'll go into some of the reasons why that is so in lesson 24 as we move forward. The Democratic Republicans choose to run Thomas Jefferson, who at this time is actually Adams' vice president, and Aaron Burr for their choices for president and vice president. So when the electoral votes come in, Adams has 65, whereas Jefferson and Burr are tied with 73. So what do we know so far? We know that Adams, being the third place with the least number of votes, he's out. So Adams will not be reelected, and in fact, it will not be a Federalist. It will definitely be a Democratic Republican. But the question is, which one? What do we do now? So we go to the Constitution, and that is in Article 2, that in the event of an electoral college tie, that the House of Representatives will break the tie by a majority vote. The House was made up of both these two parties, and they voted 35 times but failed to break the tie. So finally, Hamilton, the Federalist, used his influence with his party to get some of his members to swing over to Jefferson. And on the 36th vote, Jefferson wins. So the results of this: number one, Thomas Jefferson is now the third president of the United States. Later on, this would be followed by the 12th Amendment. They've realized this idea of first and second place being president and vice president is not working very well. So the 12th Amendment will establish the presidency as we have it today, where the two candidates run together and are actually elected in separate elections. The third result of this is that Aaron Burr, the one who was kind of shut out of this, was angry with Hamilton, and later on they would have a conflict that would result in a duel, and Burr would shoot Hamilton to death in 1804. So Aaron Burr was a former vice president, so we actually have a vice president who's committed murder, if you can believe that. And a fourth result is that the Federalist era is over, and this sets an important precedent. And that is the idea of the peaceful transfer of power from the ruling party to the opposition by the will and by the vote of the people. No one was exiled, no one was assassinated or executed, but a peaceful transition of power through the vote and the will of the people. And that's an example that has happened in this country, and is actually the U.S. has spread that example all over the world. So a new party, the Democratic Republicans, will take over the government, and Jefferson is going to change many Federalist policies, but not all. Like we said, the Democratic Republicans want a smaller government. They wanted less control over business. So some of Alexander Hamilton's ideas about government and about its role in business, they chose to do something else. They ended the whiskey tax and other taxes. Remember that whiskey rebellion we talked about? They did reduce the number of federal employees by about 10%, and they allowed those hated Alien and Sedition Acts to expire. However, they did maintain many policies. While the Democratic Republicans opposed the Bank of the U.S., they allowed it to continue. They continued the Hamilton's plan of paying off state debts. And they allowed most of the Federalists to keep their jobs in the government. So while some things were changed, a lot of things were continued from the Federalist era. And this is going to lead to the rise of the courts. Now, the Federalists have lost power. They are getting ready to lose the presidency, the executive branch, and Congress. However, they are still looking for a way that they can still have an influence and maintain power. The one thing that they can influence, and that is the judicial branch, because judges are appointed for life. So through the Judiciary Act of 1801, this allows Adams to fill the courts and appoint many of these Federalist judges. And one of these judges was John Marshall, who was the Adams Secretary of State, and would now become the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He is a strong Federalist who believes in federal power, and he served for 34 years, which is still to this day the longest Chief Justice term in U.S. history. And that's going to lead to a very important case here, and that is Marbury v. Madison and judicial review. Guys, this is one thing we really want you to understand in this lesson. This is an important idea here. William Marbury was one of these individuals given a federal judgeship under this act. And what we want to understand is that they were sometimes called the midnight judges because Adams is literally signing these judgeships and making these appointments well into the night, and the Senate is confirming them, and they're doing this like right up to midnight, right up to the very day when Jefferson's going to take power. Now, unfortunately, they ran out of time, and some of these judges who they appointed, they did not have time to actually uh, send out their notice, their notice that they had received these positions. This fell to the Secretary of State. So Jefferson's Secretary of State said, "I'm not going to do it. We don't want Federalist judges." One of them, William Marbury, sued, and so here we get the case of Marbury v. Madison, where he is suing and he wants the Supreme Court to uphold his appointment as a judge. The Supreme Court examines the case, and finally Marshall determines that the law that would allow the Supreme Court to enforce Marbury's appointment, that law was unconstitutional. And with this we get the precedent of judicial review. So while he actually ruled against the Federalists, what he did here was gave the courts a very important power, which we're getting ready to discuss here. And that is, what is judicial review? So Marbury v. Madison, what we call the M&M case. Why is that important? Let's look at it. Let's break this down into three ideas. Number one, the Constitution is the supreme law of the U.S. according to Article 6, the Supremacy Clause. Number two, that if any law in the United States disagrees with the Constitution, that law is illegal and therefore must be overturned. It is unenforceable. And number three, it is the courts that have the power to make this decision, to decide if laws are constitutional. Not the president, not Congress, but the courts, the judges. They are the ones who make that decision. So the effect of judicial review is that the judicial branch becomes an equal part of government, and this provides them that check in our checks and balances system where they can check the powers of the executive and legislative branches. And we have seen examples of judicial review in many modern decisions. We've seen examples, for example, in the Affordable Care Act. We've seen examples in religious rights or free speech or gun rights. We recently saw an example where the Supreme Court upheld the right of same-sex couples to get married. So we see examples of judicial review in our lives every day. Other important cases of the Marshall Court. One of these is McCulloch v. Maryland in 1819, in which the state of Maryland tried to put a tax on the branch of the National Bank in Maryland, and the Supreme Court ruled that states could not tax federal property and cannot tax the federal government. Then we have Gibbons v. Ogden in 1824. This was a lawsuit between the states of New York and New Jersey over who controlled ferry shipping rights between those two states. And the Supreme Court ruled that neither of them did. It was the federal government that controlled interstate commerce. So what we see in both of these cases, and the big idea here, is that the Marshall Court increased federal government power over the states. That's an important idea of the Marshall Court. That even though the Democratic Republicans are in power, the Marshall Court is still upholding Federalist ideas. Now we come to the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, and that's why that date is important. In wars going on in Europe, France won back the Louisiana Territory from Spain. Now the U.S. wanted to buy the port city of New Orleans from France in order to maintain control of trade over the Mississippi River. Instead, France countered with an offer to sell the entire Louisiana Territory for $15 million, which was a cost of 3 cents an acre, which was a bargain even back then. This left Thomas Jefferson with something of a dilemma, though. As a Democratic Republican, he believed in a strict, limited reading of the Constitution, and nowhere in the Constitution could he find that the president had the power to buy land. And yet he knew that the Louisiana Purchase could be a very good thing for the U.S. if only he could find a way to do it. So what he did is he turned to the president's power to make treaties with foreign countries, and so the Louisiana Purchase became the product of a treaty with France. So the U.S. did end up buying Louisiana Territory. We're going to actually get into that more in a later unit when we talk about westward expansion. But what we want to know for right now are the two effects. One is that we double the size of the U.S., so all of this territory here, about almost a third of the modern U.S. today, is added in this purchase. And what for them was just as important back then, yes, the territory was nice, But the gaining of the Mississippi River and the port of New Orleans were equally important because this was the main trade hub. Oops, sorry about that. This was the main trade hub, the super highway that ran right through the country, and by gaining control of the river and of the mouth and its port, this was a huge gain for the United States. Now let me introduce you to the Tecumseh, who was a Shawnee chief who lived in the Northwest Territory. Now Tecumseh was angry over the U.S. continuing to move into native land in the Northwest Territory, and he used his talents in his education to unite the native tribes in that area into one army to fight the U.S. And he did have some success. However, in 1811, the Shawnee were defeated by William Henry Harrison at the Battle of Tippecanoe, and this defeat was a severe blow to Tecumseh's plans, and later on he himself would be killed in the War of 1812. But Tecumseh is remembered as a diplomat, as a statesman, and someone who was able to unite the natives under one cause. But wait, there's more. So far, Unit 5 has covered early republic, which means domestic, home precedents and problems. But our next couple of lessons, we're going to look at how the first 5 presidents dealt with foreign countries, how they tried to avoid a war, and, well, ended up in one anyway. You fail. Sorry. So stay tuned. America. Heck yeah. And guess who's back? Look at this guy's uniform. Who's going to come back to give us trouble? We'll see. So our lesson 23 thoughts. What did the elections of 1796 and 1800 show the early republic leaders, and how did they react? How does this fit with what we learned about the Constitution in Lesson 17? You might want to go back and look at Lesson 17. I'll give you a hint. It had to do with how we make amendments. So what did these elections, how did these affect the idea of amendments? Number 2, can you think of a major example of judicial review that has had a major effect on the U.S. in your lifetime? And actually, I gave us a couple examples in this lesson. And number 3, predict at least 2 possible effects of the Louisiana Purchase on the early republic U.S. And I think that will do it here, so we'll see you back with Lesson 24 on foreign policy.